Okay, we're looking here at the third depiction that they've made of what's known as Kennewick Man. We're going to discuss that a little bit more. This is an article that was done back in 2015, although there's a 2017 article that kind of trumps this idea. And in the process, you can see the politicalness of all this at work after the point that it became a problem for Native Americans and the National Science Bureau to get together on this. I just want to mention, or for you to look and get a good representation of what's being shown here. Now, if you look at this guy and versus the skull that's here, if we see the slenderness of his nostrils, his nose, his nasal aperture, the corner area here and the cornea area here, if we were to take this nose and just put it on top of here, it would have a hard time breathing through the vents that would be half closed by this vent. He actually would have a thinner nose than this, much like the Jean-Luc Picard version that they did in the very first one, if y'all are familiar with it. Now, regardless of the color of the skin of that man, you could tell that it was a Caucasoid and didn't look like the Buffalo Nickel Indian that we're all familiar with, of course. But that always had a big hooked nose on it too, which kind of looked like Kennewick 1, but didn't look like Kennewick 3. Now, a professional forensic guy got a hold of this idea, and he talked about a few different things, like position of the eyes versus the sockets. And if you just go back and forth and look at this, and the position of the eyes versus the sockets, they've tried to set them too high in correlation to where they would be in naturalness. Can you see that? Just a little. It doesn't make much of a difference, but if you've ever done a character like in that D&D game that I've got, and you change somebody's face just a little bit and then back off and look at it, it looks totally different. And you go from somebody's face that's like real oval to somebody's face that's real slender and long, you know? Somebody's face is round, somebody's face is what they call horse-faced, like when you try to get Akhenaten's picture or something along that line, right? Well, one thing to note here, other than that, they talk about how the cheekbones in that one forensic guy doesn't have much. Feel your own cheekbones now, and you don't have much padding over your cheekbone, okay, at all. Now, do a big smile like a squint, and you'll notice you get that muscle up there. Now, let off of it while you're still feeling it, and you'll realize you don't have much. Now, look at how much they gave this guy over each one of the cheeks versus his cheekbones, which aren't prominent. They're fairly high cheekbones, if you will, but they're not as prominent as what they give him. That's another thing that the forensic guy was having a problem with, and I can easily see that. Another thing that I noted off in it, and he said something too about it, is this jaw is not the same as this. In fact, the original Kennewick 1 that looks like Jean-Luc Picard doesn't have as prominent as a jaw as this skeleton would require. It would look something more like Charlton Heston, almost Thanos, that he has a prominent jaw system. And to make that just go away here, they've put the beard on him. Okay, all right, now give that a second to set in. But also, they denote that in his genetics that they figured out now that it has a lot of Amerindian in it, but there's a portion that isn't, but they're fixing to lie after they found out that fact, and it's what's in the 2017 paper. And it's that little other side, that little side note that these people don't mention. But you don't see his chin there because he's got a big beard to it. And I don't know if anybody's noticed, but they totally agree with this this interpretation now as opposed to the Jean-Luc Picard version, right? You might be familiar with this, okay? But in this version, he has wavy, curly hair that's not like the Amerindians who have straight hair. Another interesting fact is Amerindians, in most all their variations, grow little to none facial hair whatsoever. In fact, most of them never grow any at all. It's not even a little bit of a chin beard or things like that happens. They literally stay clean shaven all their life. They never grow stubble out in any way, shape, or form. Some people know this to be true. Now, they can get admixed, and the same thing is true of black people too, by the way. True Africans they have very little eyebrows at all, and they grow very little facial hair. But with the admix that they've got that to spurn out or whatever, but normally it doesn't grow much facial hair. But regardless of that fact, they show him with facial hair, and they try to tell you that he is an Amerindian, whenever the depiction that they're willing to accept, A, shows questionable cheek width if you'll look at it, questionable eye set, and then the jaw's covered up with the beard, but he has curly hair. This isn't something that's normal. He has facial hair like crazy, and that's not even indicative of Amerindians. And this just goes flying right by people. Right? Drink a coffee. Okay. So let's get into this just a little bit. The mystery of Kennewick man identity finally solved, they say. Right? And DNA is Native American. Well, that would be a false statement too. DNA from this man would have been recent migrant. Real recent migrant. But in a couple of papers that I've read that are talking about this, it says, well, somebody like this would be called a Native Amerindian just as much as an American of today after this amount of time could be called a Native American, because generations and they've grown up in that, the Caucasians and stuff. And I said, well, okay, but then again, we know we're recent migrants and they are too. It's native at that point. You would be saying, oh, this is an endemic person that's been here, and it's like, no, it doesn't show it at all. In fact, it shows that he was eating seafoods and going around the seawater and stuff, and his teeth and the selenium check on it showed that he was drinking Arctic meltwater for almost all of his life, to the point that he would have been fresh off the boat, if you will, if he was involved with a boat at all. I don't know, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. Nearly 2 decades ago, 2 young men stumbled across a human skull in the Columbian River at Kennewick, Washington. The discovery ended up being one of the biggest archaeological finds of a generation and caused a storm of controversy ever since. His unique characteristics led to all manner of theories regarding his identity, from Native American to Polynesian, European, and even the Ainu from Japan. And there's something interesting they're going to reveal about him, the Ainu. However, a new DNA analysis has finally solved the mystery, but they leave actually what is 32% of its DNA out, and just go with the major on this one. Now, found 2 decades ago by kids, what they were doing, it's funny, they were going out here on the river one day, and here's a guy with his dog, separate picture, but they were going out here on the river, and over here in an area that you can't get into in any way unless you pay for it and stuff. So what they did was they parked way over here, and they were going to wander around the edge of the river and get and sneak into the area. By the way, they ended up going to that, and they were going to sneak into the boat races. This is a hydroplane high-speed boat races, and in the process, one of them stepped on a head, and he was like, "What's that? You know, cannonball or something?" He picked it up out of the water, and it was a head. They freaked out. They put it in the bushes, You know what kids do? They put it in the bushes, and they went ahead and snuck around and watched that boat show. And then they came and snuck back around and got the head, called the police, and the police came out, and over the area right there in the edge of the water and out of the water right there in the two, they found some 96% of his bones. Pretty neat. But that's what really broke down with it. Now, following that discovery of the Kennewick skull, archaeologists were able to recover 350 bones and fragments and dated the remains to be somewhere between 8,000 and 9,500 years old. They've also done a better version of it. It's one of the reasons why they kept the bones, but then off the controversy, they didn't do anything. They've really been just sitting there instead of somebody going ahead and doing it, because they said that they couldn't necessarily. They didn't want to overstep boundaries and just go ahead and do it anyhow, which everybody would say would be the way, you know, that white people do it and everything else. But no, they tried to be respectful in this, to, you know, truth and reality. People consider it, the whole thing, to be disrespectful. And hell, these kids found this. At first, they thought this thing might have been within 100 years old. Yeah, it was sent to a regular forensic guy at first. And then he goes, well, it's European and stuff. It's not a Amerindian or anything. Oh, it's old as hell. And they go, well, it's more European looking. It's not an Amerindian skull. And that's what started the weird controversy. So they dated it, and it dated at that number. And they go, well, this forensic guy, you know, he knows skulls and craniometry. So what's the deal with that? So they've always been backpedaling on this craniometry. And people have checked it. Problem is they didn't like the first 4 people that checked it, until this one last group checked it, and then they want to leave it at this one. So 3 strikes, but that's not an out, and 3 strikes, but then they go ahead and one of them must have been a foul ball, and we're just going to go ahead and call that a walk. That's pretty much the way they've done it. The remains were determined to be those of a male of late middle age and tall with slender build, and also his height doesn't fit normal Amerindians either. The guy's like 5'9.5", something like that, close to that range in centimeters. Kennewick man has become known as one of the oldest and most complete skeletons ever found in North America. However, its significance doesn't end there. And I've recently showed a video where they found 2 that are older than him in Alaska, separate finds, and both of those are Proto Indo Europeans. And then they've also found Malta Boy and over on that range, and they are starting to mix in that range too, Proto Indo Europeans and some other things. So there's a portion of it, and most of it seems mitochondrial or female DNA. And so it makes you wonder if they did some raiding party and took the women, and if that's what was involved with it, or what. But one thing's for sure, it does actually show up this genetic pattern, this what's known as X. During the analysis on Kennewick man's skeleton, archaeologist James Chatters was surprised to discover that his anatomical features were quite different from those of modern Native Americans. In particular, his long, narrow face, prominent chin. Oh, and I didn't mention before, and I don't want to zip it back up there to it. I guess I have to. The other difference in the variable of it, and of course, of any of the depictions versus what reality is. Of course, here you couldn't tell if you had to, because he's got a big beard on him. But this has a cleft chin. Yeah, and it's not a normal thing depicted also on an Amerindian. He has like that Kirk Douglas thing going on. And that's not a normal Amerindian trait at all. In fact, who that does trait to is one of the reasons that these guys kept giving him a analysis that showed him to be a little different. With that prominent chin. He also has that narrow face, prominent chin, and tall stature. Did not resemble remains of other Paleo-Indians. So he's in fact different somewhat. In fact, the facial measurements show most similar to the Ainu of Japan, and in a secondary rate to the Proto Indo Europeans. actually really at this time would have been the pre-Proto Indo Europeans. In fact, the facial measurements show most similar to the Ainu of Japan they talk about. Now, the Ainu are a Caucasian minority who once possessed the whole of the Japanese islands. Let that sink in real quick. And so, if what it, well, he wasn't Proto Indo European, or what we would call, a European or a Caucasian. He wasn't a Caucasian. Okay, so what was he? Well, he was closest to these people that they call most similar to the Ainu of Japan. Okay, well, who are the Ainu? Well, in origin, now there's some admix there, but you can still tell the difference. The Ainu are a Caucasian minority who once possessed the whole of the Japanese islands. People closely related to the Ainu also once lived in Polynesia, and many light-skinned Polynesians, typically from the ruling class, have facial features similar to Kennewick man. And so, in the process of debunking him, they give forth a truth that's far too revealing. For they say, well, no, he's not like Proto Indo Europeans, he's like the Ainu. Oh, well, who are the Ainu? The Ainu are a Caucasian minority who once possessed the whole of the Japanese islands, and they lived throughout the Polynesian islands at one time, too. Welcome to reality. You're welcome. Yeah, we're doing a video on that, but I had to wait and find this again, by the way. And strange, because this was on somebody else's paper, and I couldn't find the version. But this is now on that site. It was on there, and I've never seen it before. But this is also on the site where it says, first complete genome sequence of ancient North American offers clue to Native American ancestry. And that is the exact one that says, hey, there is Proto Indo Europeans coming across. I did 2 videos about it. One of them is that statement. One of them is on the paper itself. Now, if you've been watching my videos, you've seen that. Also, here's Malta Boy right here. And 24,000-year-old boy reveals origin of Native Americans. So I've gone through basically all of that. So extensive radiocarbon and DNA testing could have resolved some of these uncertainties long ago. However, attempts to research the remains in depth were curtailed by more than a decade of legal clashes between scientists, the American government, and 5 different Native American tribes who claim Kennewick man as one of their ancestors. By the way, 3 of those didn't have an overlapping territory ever within hundreds of miles of there. So there was a big claim stake done onto it. But regardless, in 2004, a group of anthropologists sued the United States for the right to conduct tests on the skeletons. So it had to get to that point. The government couldn't step in on their own behalf. It was ruled by them that a cultural link between any of the Native American tribes and Kennewick man was not genetically justified, allowing for scientific study of the remains to continue. So in other words, there's enough of a question about it from being so ancient that it needs to be verified. And they were going to do one of 2 things with him. I think it was the proposals. They were going to build a little shrine for him right there where the kids found the thing at, but make it a non-viewable, especially if they wanted it that way, back like it was, but then put a thing around it to where no one ever gets into it and it's sealed off. A little shrine thing. Or if they wanted to do it on their land, if they could figure out which one they were closest to or related to. Funny how it ended up at the end of that. I'll get to that in a moment, though. Anthropologist Joseph Powell of the University of New Mexico examined the remains, which were analyzed using craniolomic data, including those from Asian and North American population. Powell confirmed what Chatters had initially claimed, that Kennewick man was not European, but mostly resembled the Caucasian Ainu and Polynesians. Powell said that dental analysis showed that the skull had a 94% chance of being a pseudodont group like the Ainu. Okay, and Polynesians. And hey, what's your IQ test out? Is it way over here where some people are? Or Is it up here in the range of normal, or maybe it's up here in the pegging up range? I've tested it about here, a little over that too. Here's a picture of an Ainu. One thing that you can easily tell about this is it looks somewhat like a Japanese man that's been admixed, but he looks like he's wearing a fake beard. Well, again, Japanese people don't grow the greatest facial hair, and there's a variation that does and a variation that doesn't. There's a lot of Caucasians that have that too, where they'll have parts on the sides and the jowl area where it won't grow in good and things like that. Sometimes people don't have that thick beard, and of course nowadays there's that trend to just half shave it and so on and show your beard. It's always a one-day grow beard, one or two. But what's just interesting is that also Japanese, like the Indians, have real straight hair, and that's one thing that they always tried to connect with those people, is that there must have been some type of Asian that's not quite related to them, but it's got some mix with it that went over. Well, this guy has curly hair. Hopefully you can see it down the edge and down the edge here. It's more curly hair, and also his beard's real curly and fantastically big curly type hair. But also it doesn't show in this shot, but he has blue-gray eyes. You can tell they're lighter eyes if you look at them. This is just one of the pictures, but this is the Ainu of 1900s or so, and a lot of mix, because there are Japanese people that are there now, mixed into the nobility that were there, were these people who used to own all of the Japanese islands. And I've done a video where I talked about ancient Sumerian connections to Japan and so on, but this is another way. And recently we talked about coming this way and who brought the yin-yang symbol and so on, and into China, and then the Tarim Basin mummies and the pyramids that are up there and everything in the edge of China. But I haven't really talked about the Japanese people since last before Christmas, so here we go, pegging it that way. That, yep, now how did they get there? And so here we have that boat thing again and all the other things we talked about. In 2005, a 10-day examination of the skeleton led by forensic anthropologist Douglas Owsley further confirmed that the skull's features resemble those of the Ainu, those Caucasians. And when they show you that picture there, that's a high admixed Ainu. There are really no non-admixed Ainu now, but people can tell, and he straightforward tells you it's not an Oriental person. It's not a Mongol. Okay. He suggested that the man's ancestors may have retreated from advancing people from Central Asia and traveled by boat over generations along the coast northward and east to North America. However, a new study published in the Natural Journal draws this conclusion into question. The research involved in a DNA analysis conducted on a sample taken from Kennewick man's hand bone, which was then compared to the DNA of modern Native Americans and Polynesians. And so the team also reanalyzed the skull and concluded that because it was just one sample, it was well within the range of variation that could have been found among ancestral Native American populations. Okay, but also it's well within the range of European populations and stuff. In fact, it looks like Caucasian European or Caucasian Anu. It doesn't look like the Amerindian, and it doesn't look like the Oriental part of the Ainu. They've stated that all along, but you can see them backing out, and they go, well, it can fit within it. Yeah, it can fit within a lot of them if you're willing to say it's a one sample thing. Here's his whole body laid out when they're testing it. The results showed that the DNA of Kennewick man was most similar to the modern day Native American DNA. Well, that's true, except for one problem of that X DNA that he has, is mitochondrial DNA. But yeah, that X seems to have come across, and its variant that it turned into wasn't the variant that happened on the other side. It's like X2B is what ends up coming out of it. And that could have been from the way things mixed together and the people mixed together, and that wasn't happening over on the other side. But you still got X2, an X, you know, but you don't get the exact same thing out of it eventually over time. This is how you get slight different variations of dog and what a Shetland Sheephound is and stuff like that. But regardless, so Live Signs Dave Metzger, which we've had a few of his, Meltzer, we've had a few of his things on here. There's no getting around it. Kennewick man is a Native American. I agree with that, but I'm a Native American too. In fact, just about as much been in time in America with my people as his people were at that time. And he was actually really recently migrant, and well, really, then I guess I am too. But really, now he's a Native American. Oh well, I guess I am now too. But no getting around it that they never want to talk about how they're recent migrants. In fact, he says, wow, he just came over, recent migrant, the Native American. Well, we just call them Native. Well, you can call them Amerindians. If you say Native, it's really trying to put something like Aboriginal on. Is it not? And he's from SMU here in Dallas. What's that IQ at, man? The new DNA also sheds light on the ancient migrations that the peopling of the Americas. Last year, Willerslev and his colleagues analyzed DNA from a 12,600-year-old skeleton known as the Anzic Boy, unearthed in Montana, and I did a video about it. That DNA revealed the first Amerindians split into two groups before Anzic Boy lived. One lineage migrated southward to populate Central and South America and become the Mayans and Aztecs and so on, while the other branch headed north along the northwest coast of North America and into Canada. And the new data suggested Kennewick man's group formed a third offshoot that diverged from the southern lineage, but then migrated back north, but then not actually back into the old world. This lineage includes modern and Native Americans such as the Colville and some other Pacific Northwest tribes, and it's the closest one to them. But here's the weird thing, guys. Nobody living today in all of that area has DNA that looks just like his. That would have said, okay, well, yeah, he is pretty close, or he's pretty close, and so on. And if they look at the mitochondrial DNA, though, that group in that area does have some of that X haplogroup, and we'll look at that in just a second. While Kennewick man's identity has finally been revealed, well, no, it's only been half revealed. You're lying about the other, 32%. Maybe still some time before his remains and the controversy surrounding the discovery are finally laid to rest, Native American tribes continue in their battle to have their remains reburied. And I'd like to announce that I've been told that it's been reburied and everything, that now after doing this last test, they of course have the haplogroup and everything about that. They're not going to know anymore. They did a secondary skeletal things that they can always compare to the other ones, and they've got it within enough data off of it. There's been enough BS. And they also gave them like $2.6 million to all those tribes, and in fact even the three that didn't have anything to do with it. And it's always works out something like that. So let's look at X. Let's see what haplogroup X says. Now, haplogroup X is a human mitochondrial DNA haplogroup, and it is found in America, in Europe, in Western Asia, in North Africa, and the Horn of Africa. Let that sink in for a second. Whenever they show you a picture like this of where it goes, it's Pacific Northwest Indians, not from over here where he was, but here. Great Lakes and stuff, and all of those up in that area. And then where else is it? Well, it's all over Europe and North Africa. In fact, this is all Caucasian stuff here. And even this little shoot that was out here, which we've talked about. This is the Alexandria the farthest, and that colony was out there at the time, and they actually contain that X haplogroup too. So that says some of the Greeks and Minoans and everything have that too, doesn't it? Yeah, it kind of says that they were doing something there, but then all of these people in here, and this really looks like a lot of what they were calling Aryan lands at one time, which is strange to say that that's what makes up India's, or Indians, Amerindians, not India. And Asia Minor is really keyed here. So Greece and Asia Minor is keyed real hard. Isn't that strange? And looking at it spread out here of where it came from and its parent groups, and U and R and N that are looking like it comes out of this, and the different ones and that split and migrate into it. And yeah, that shows quite a neat connection. And of course this has to do with part of the Caucasian influx that you see now today in Ethiopia and Somalia, and the different head structure of those people, and it doesn't look really Negroid. And we've done a video recently about them talking about other Caucasian influx at 3500 BC. But what they're not saying there is that there were all primordial Caucasians all through the Horn, and it's really looking at it as a lot of Negroid influx that came in later. In fact, that's what's shown in that video there, that they say, well, this one came before that one, right? And they have this was going on, then they had an influx of this Caucasian at 3400 BC, and then what's ran over that now is black people. So just going to go a little bit into this, but not much. It's approximately found in 7% of native Europeans, but 3% of all Native Americans from North America. Overall, X haplogroup is found in around 2% of the population of Europe and the Near East and North Africa. It's especially common among Egyptians inhabiting the El Hayez oasis. 14.3% they found in the people there. X1 subclad is much less frequent and largely restricted to North Africa and the Horn of Africa and Near East. So there's a splitting of a variation of these, right? And it doesn't, that can't be anything but Caucasian DNA and a Caucasian haplogroup, but it shows its ancient split that's in there. Appears to have undergone an extensive population expansion to Persil around the last glacial maximum around 21,000 years ago. It's more strongly present in the Near East, the Caucasus Mountains, in southern Europe, and somewhat less strongly present in the rest of Europe. Particularly concentrations are in Georgia, like right over the Caucasus Islands, basically, and at 8% in Orkney in Scotland, too, at 7%. Amongst the Israeli Druze community, 27% subclads X2A and X2G are found in North America, but not present in native South Americans, and so there's a variation on a theme there. Many of the earlier carriers of haplogroup X2 were found in eastern maritime Canada and prime theoretical landing location for Salutreans. This encouraged adherence to the Salutrean hypothesis. However, more recent discoveries of haplogroup X2A and subgroups have been widely and geographically dispersed. Neither is there a path of ancestral form of X2A found in Europe or the Middle East. And that's what I was talking about, how it didn't ever come back. The ones that went over didn't ever come back. Well, they talk about it as being a bridge that went away. And so they went, but they never came back. But there was mixing in between them, right? Haplogroup X has been found among ancient Egyptian mummies excavated at Absur el-Melek. In this recent study, they even found more of them. Archaeological site in Middle Egypt, which date to the pre-Ptolemaic late New Kingdom and Roman periods. And now the last one is like end of early and then through mid and stuff, and they did over 100 bodies, but got 92 of them's DNA out of it, at least mitochondrial and the things that go with it. But then 3 of them, they got the entire genome string of them. And what they were expecting to find is changes that went through time. And luckily, the bodies that they did get the 3 on were through some period of time. And with the Persians coming in and everything, so they were going to see, okay, here, and then here's Persian DNA. And of course, they've got a few of those old ancient Aryan Persian DNAs. And they'd be like, okay, so yeah, you know, but it never happened. They actually said it looks pretty smooth. And then any Negroid DNA, and it shows up after Roman times, like in the slave trade and stuff. But ironically, black people still try to claim that they were all black people, and the Caucasians showed up later. Of course, most of them saying this are West Africans, and they didn't have anything to do with anything, but that might have some reason. The reason they would try to say so, but then with everybody knowing the truth, it would just look pathetic. Fossils excavated at the late Neolithic site of Kif al-Baroud in Morocco, which have been dated around 3000 BC, have also observed to carry the X2 subclad, so in northern Morocco area there. And I don't know if you know, they've recently in Jebel Irhoud Cave found Homo sapiens at 315,000 BC, pushing that date much, much further. And you know, they tried to give you a model whenever I was young, that this turned into this, and now everything is overlapping so much it can't be that model in any way, shape, or form that they tried to originally give us. But haplogroups been found in ancient Egyptian mummies there, and it's also been found in various other fossils that were analyzed for ancient DNA, including specimens associated with the Aldophor linear pottery and linear band ceramic, and in the Iberian Chalcolithic people that were around there in Iberia, which is Spain, and even in El Mirador cave. Now, the Druze have it around Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, and as much as 16% as in X2 at 11%. The Druze also have much diversity of X lineages, so there shows you a different connection too, and what maybe something that people need to look into a little closer. The Galilee Druze represent a population of isolates, so their combination of high frequency and diversity of X signifies a phylogenetic refugium, trapped pretty much inside of itself, proving a sample snapshot of the genetic landscape of the Near East prior to the modern age. So in other words, they're telling you that these ancient Caucasians were in there too. And I've talked a lot about who was actually where in elder times and where they are now. Some people moved out of a desert into much greener pastures. But in North America, it's found in indigenous peoples, and can be found in Algonquin peoples, and it comprises up 25% of the MDD DNA, and also the Sioux at 15%, and in the only Mandan Sioux that they checked, it hits near 30%. New Kalkuth at 11 and 13%, Navajo at 7%, and Yakama at 5%. And because it's over in that area, like I showed you, it doesn't make any sense to them unless they came in and ran all the way over, and all the other ones came in and mixed, and then there was back mixing, and it looks like that's what happened. It pretty much melted into that pot of food, if you will. Unlike the 4 main Native American MDA haplogroups, which is A, B, C, and D, X is not strongly associated with East Asia. The main occurrence of X in Asia discovered as far as in the Altai people of Siberia. And now we're back connected to those Proto Indo Europeans. And now we're talking about those exact people we've been talking about recently, and the connection to Malta Boy and everything. And so this does lead back to that kind of truth. So I won't read the rest of this. It goes on and on and on for pages. But they talk about how X2A, which is exactly what he is not found in Eurasia. Okay, well, no, it's a one exclusive. But X2A is X2 variant and a subgroup of someone it is. And then the clad that it hooks up to actually hooks up to people that are in these areas here. So the Pacific Northwest, or Northeast, Atlantic Northeast, even up into the cold lands where the Vikings came. And, Anatolia and ancient Caucasian lands, from Horn of Africa, all of North Africa, Spain, Britain, all the way up into Denmark. But they're not showing that Altai people, are they? Whenever they said it, they're showing it hooks up here, so that again shows you kind of where those Altai people went, doesn't it? It's funny how they're scared to put it all together for anybody, because that would be so racist. Anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. There's some more information on Kennewick, man, and if you'll put this together with the other one that I did, I think we'll see the truth and effect of it. And more information coming on this too. Peace.